Viva on stuff. What kind of stuff do you have?
More Russia madness. We're going to take a trip from America to Canada to Romania back to America. We talked about the Tenant media indictment back in the day, like Russian influence. There was an indictment of 2 RT employees for allegedly subversively financing the operations of Tenant Media, an American company, to influence, whatever, hire on conservative.
Well, they said like Charlie Kirk was named, Tim Pool was named,
Dave Rubin, Lauren Southern. So that indictment came, that indictment went, that day of the news cycle disappeared, and now America has all but forgotten about it, and I'd say rightly so.
Except for the left. The left keeps bringing up every time I'm on social media and I see a Tim Pool post, like one of the first tweets that I see underneath.
Oh, you getting those Russian dollars.
Exactly.
They were saying that before because they're idiots. The bottom line is this was a setup, that indictment from the first place, into indicting 2 foreigners who are never going to appear so you can have that news cycle in the election season. Okay, came and went. Canada, because we're a little bit behind and a little bit ahead of America in certain senses, has now launched parliamentary hearings. Basically a parliamentary investigation into, and I'm quoting it, quote, Russian disinformation influence in Canadian politics. So relying on the indictment out of America, of not Tenant Media, because they were actually never indicted, of those 2 Russians, and because it involved Lauren Chen, who's Canadian, the Canadian Parliament, which consists of 3 corrupt parties, the New Democrat Party, NDP, Jagmeet Singh, scum of the earth, the Liberal corrupt party, led by Justin Trudeau, scum of the earth, and the Conservative Party of Canada, who are, in my view, slightly less corrupt, but not much better than the Liberals. They're holding parliamentary investigations into Russian interference in Canadian politics. While at the same time, if you don't know this, having been thoroughly infiltrated by Chinese Communist Party agents, China at large, and Indian government elements, Khalistani extremists in Canadian government, in Canadian society. Okay, so they've actually got an infiltration problem of China and India in Canadian politics, and this is their red herring. They called Lauren Chen to testify, summoned her, subpoenaed her with parliamentary subpoenas. Lauren Chen came, basically pled the fifth, and they had an hour of these idiot political hacks.
She's Canadian?
Lauren Chen is Canadian, yeah. Lambasting her like...
And you can plead the fifth in Canada?
There's an equivalent of the fifth, but it's not quite the fifth. But she basically said, here's my statement. There's no Fifth Amendment under Canadian law, but I have the right to not self-incriminate, so I'm not going to answer because I'm potentially under investigation in the States. So they have her there for an hour. They just grill her, ask her stupid loaded questions, and she says, I can't answer. Lauren Southern is also subpoenaed. Lauren Southern. She comes up and testifies. It was mastery. Her answering of those questions made them look like the biggest jackasses on earth that they are. They're continuing with this Russian investigation, and they either subpoenaed or got the willing participation of a woman who I refer to as Canada's Taylor Lorenz. There's no other way to describe the so-called journalist Rachel Gilmore other than the Canada Taylor Lorenz. She was subpoenaed or offered to testify, and she's one of the experts on disinformation, misinformation. And the hearing was interrupted by a fire alarm, but they got their 5-minute opening statements for the 3 expert witnesses, one of which was her. And they're continuing this Russia Gate bullshit up in Canada. But play the first clip of Rachel Gilmore, then we're going to get into the other expert, which then led me down the rabbit hole of what the hell's going on in Romania, and you'll see how this all ties together afterwards. Rachel Gilmore's opening statement, a highlight.
In the documents the DOJ released in September in the U.S., we saw details from Russia's Good Old USA project and its guerrilla media campaign in the United States. Those documents show Russia identified existing sources of polarization to then exploit. The, quote, campaign topics they plan to focus on included stuff like what they called the, quote, threat of crime coming from people of color and immigrants, and, quote, risk of job loss for white Americans, and what they called, quote, privileges for people of color, perverts, and disabled. So that gives you a sense of the kinds of divisions Russia focused on exacerbating. It's got a lot in common with what I would call the right-wing grifter sphere and what comes out of there, where people rail against immigration, attack diversity and inclusion, pearl clutch about anti-white racism, and oppose trans rights. Like, those are the kinds of topics you hear from people like Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, and Lauren Southern. And those are the same influencers who ended up on the payroll at Tenant Media, which Russia was allegedly funding to spread its talking points. If we accept the premise that Russia never influenced their editorial decisions, as these influencers claimed after the fact, that implies these folks are so good at dividing and polarizing Western society that Russia likely saw it as a good investment to just fund them to make more of their organic content.
Oh, we cut out the yikes part. Sorry, she goes, yikes, at the end, and that will become a meme. So appreciate this, all you Russian adjacent propagandists. If you complain about rampant immigration, the nefarious consequences of DEI, anti-white racism, because that's what it is, anti-Christian racism, because that's what it is. If you complain about any of these things, you're a Russian asset, Russian adjacent, or, because the three that they named there did it, tools for Russia. Not legitimate policy. You're an extremist, and you need to bow down to DEI, transgender ideology, unless you want to be called a Russian asset. Rob.
Well, even just on the DEI issue, what we're seeing now, and we see it in the research when I'm going through stories for PBD podcast, is that there's major companies reducing their DEI initiatives or rolling them back altogether.
So you're a Harley.
Yeah, Harley, John Deere. You're also
Microsoft, University of Florida.
Colleges are now removing their DEI programs. So are they also radicals like us? Are they extremists and dangers to society?
Well, first of all, Russian asset, Russian asset, Russian asset. But
no, what about him?
He didn't say anything. So, but what you understand now is that they're using this as a cudgel to beat people into political compliance. Because if you dare object to outright racist policy or terrible immigration policy, well, nobody has to listen to you because you're a Russian tool or a Russian propagandist. And that was what this was all intended to be weaponized for in the first place.
So they're labeling you to discredit you so that your opinion doesn't carry any weight so that they can continue to destroy these societies with their terrible policies.
So that anybody who opposes their terrible failed policies, even as these companies pull the policies all back overtly, should be discredited, not listened to, and they get to run rampant with their awful, terrible policies.
Can you give me some more context on the cultural view of Canada about, because we had the whole McCarthy thing here, and then the Cold War, and Russia was the enemy. So, like, when you say someone's a Russian asset, it has a weight to both the left and the right. How is it like that in Canada?
Until Russiagate in 2016, I mean, maybe I wasn't conscious enough. I didn't hear a damn thing about Russia, communism, or any of Russian interference in Canadian
politics. You guys didn't
politics.
go through the 60s and 70s.
No, I was born in '79, so.
No, but did Canada go through it? Like
we did. I mean, we did, but Canada. I couldn't talk about that necessarily. But all I know is in modern politics, I haven't heard. My grandmother was Russian, but I think she was part of what was Ukraine at the time. No, in modern times, this has just been weaponized.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, Russia was the enemy. Russia had nuclear bombs. Russia has a weight, like as a constant enemy of freedom in America.
We're influenced by American culture, so in the same, we watch the same movies, and Russians were always the villains in them. But it was never like so much part of the Canadian political landscape until 2016, and even more so now. So just to highlight that, if you take politically adverse positions to the liberal progressive government, you're a Russian asset. That was the one highlight here. They had another guy who is the so-called expert on disinformation out of Finland, who then said something.
That guy Finnish?
No, this guy Iquinder Gahir is the Speaker of the House. You look at the Canadian political landscape, and then
Speaker of the House
for Canada.
This guy,
I think it's something like 20%. 20% of MPs are born outside of Canada.
I don't think it's called a turban.
Hijab.
No,
it's called a turban. Well, the way you said, Brandon, come on, I thought he was being Islamophobic.
That looks like the Middle East, doesn't it?
No, he's Sikh. He's Indian. He's not. But the bottom line, I think it's something like 20% of Canadian MPs are born outside of Canada. So while they're calling you racist for saying that there's a great replacement going on in Canada, a quarter of MPs are from outside of Canada.
It's like case in point.
And 95%, 97% of immigration or population growth is from immigration. 500,000 a year in a country of 40 million. So there is a great replacement. Yeah. It's just not racial, it's political. And bottom line, it's true. It's not a racist conspiracy theory.
By the way, it's called a Death Star. That's the official name of the turban.
Well, okay, listen to what this expert has to say, and then it's going to draw us into Romania and then right back to America.
Beautiful.
Mr. Kalionemi to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
I now follow him on Twitter.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today. So my name is Pekka Kallioniemi. I'm a Finnish expert on social media and disinformation. And in recent years, I have mainly focused on Russian online disinformation in a series titled Vatnik Soup. It's safe to say that during the last 10 years, Russian online influence operations have been the most effective in the world. And the Kremlin has attempted to interfere with elections and referendums around the world. The latest example is the massive social media campaign that Russia ran before the presidential elections in Romania. An unknown pro-Kremlin anti-NATO candidate gained over 20% of the total vote during the first round, only by campaigning on TikTok. The whole elections were eventually annulled due to the massive Russian interference campaign exposed by Romanian intelligence agencies.
We can pause it here.
In many countries...
So I'm watching this. This is Pekka Kallioniemi testifying before Canadian Parliament that elections in Romania were just annulled because they determined that they were invalid because the guy who won was a relative, not an unknown, but an outsider, right-wing anti-NATO, and who ran a campaign on TikTok apparently very successfully.
Yeah.
So
to what position of office?
Well, it was the first round of the presidential election.
Okay.
And so he and this other person won, number 1 and 2. And so the round 2 is going to be between the two of them. The guy who apparently didn't spend very much money, if any, on his campaign, ran a very successful TikTok campaign. They say that was weird because it wasn't that the votes were illegitimate. People voted for him. They counted. I don't know if they did a formal audit, but they counted the votes. The votes were legit. It's just that the reasons, the influencing factors came from a TikTok campaign, which they determined was influenced by Russian intelligence, Russian assets. And the Constitutional Court of Romania says, we are annulling the outcome of this election, and we're going to call it again in the spring. And we're not sure if Kalin Georgescu is going to be able to run in it again because they're going to go after him criminally, whatever. They're going to try to exclude the guy who was a populist right-winger, anti-NATO, from the election because they didn't like the results, and all they have to do is allege Russian interference. This guy's testifying about this before Canadian Parliament as if this is now the international precedent to be set. And I'm sitting there thinking, I hadn't heard about this coming out of Romania. My grandmother, incidentally, was Romanian, or at least her family was Romanian. I hadn't heard about this, so I go look, and it's 1,000% true. The Constitutional Court of Romania annulled the election on the basis that intelligence and the outgoing president, who now gets to sit there indefinitely until they get a new president, declassified documents which allegedly showed Russian interference with TikTok accounts, and that's how this guy allegedly won. And so they say, they didn't prove anything. They didn't have any concrete evidence. They just say, declassifying allegations of Russian interference in TikTok annulled the election. We can actually skip over the speech because
Amy, you had something you wanted to say.
I had a question. Is Romania an ally of Russia?
Is Romania
an ally?
NATO? Right?
No. Romania's in NATO.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so Romania, the issue is that this guy Kalin Georgescu, who just got past the first rounds, whether or not he's pro-Russian, he's anti-NATO.
It was a Yanukovych situation.
It's Maidan 2.0.
I get what you're saying. So here's my question, though. So you're saying that this could then be precedent to possibly discredit election outcomes in Canada, America. Maybe it's setting a precedent elsewhere. To me, it doesn't make any sense because if Russia believes these things like immigration is bad, there are only two genders, and they believe that this type of mindset is going to be healthier for the people of Russia and it's going to make Russia prosper more, why would they want to get Russian disinformation into the United States that's propagating the same message? Wouldn't that just help America and other countries flourish more by adopting these policies? And do they want us to flourish? Like, we're not allies with them.
But it's sort of like a climate change type application of reasoning where whatever happens, they get to blame it on climate. Oh, if it gets colder, it's climate change. If it gets warmer, it's climate change. The ocean temperature is getting colder. So this is whatever happens, they say it's Russian interference. Just sowing discord is itself in Russia's best interest because it destabilizes the West. Ironically enough, it's specifically the West that's destabilizing other parts of the world to promote their own agendas.
Right.
I don't know if I have
backwards.
No, it's not. It's not Saul Alinsky. It's Joseph Goebbels' Nazi propaganda. Accuse your adversaries of doing what you are doing, so as to create confusion. I don't know if we have the audio, but the bottom line, in terms of how this all gets back to America, is you now understand. I was listening to a podcast on the way over here to try to understand this because I'm not from Romania. I'm relatively new. to put it mildly, to what's going on there.
What
If
were you
we
listening to?
Say it again.
What were you listening to? It came on my feed too.
Yeah, well, because I put up a clip on Twitter or on X about this, Anthony Blinken having his fingerprints on this.
Love that guy.
Bring up the screen grab that has the highlighted section, just so we can. Here we go. TikTok promoting him. Listen to this. TikTok promoting him were not marked as election content, violating Romania's laws, it said, while one account paid out $381,000 in the space of a month to users who pushed Georgescu's candidacy, while he said he had not paid anything for his campaign. The allegations are that he was using influencers, or that influencers were being paid to push that agenda. Ironically enough, exactly what Kamala Harris was doing in America. The amazing thing about this is that this has now been set as precedent to overturn what was, even by their own admission, not illegitimate elections. It was just illegitimate influencing, leading to legitimate votes, and testifying before Canada about this. And they're going to try
the Hunter Biden thing.
Well, the irony is that, intelligence, now that you understand how it works in America, when intelligence says that Hunter Biden laptop is fake, when you have another 100 signing a letter saying Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset, and then you have, in Romania, intelligence saying there was Russian interference, so we're annulling the results of a democratic election.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to lose Romania as a NATO partner. They want to build another base, I forget where it is in Romania, on the sea. They can't risk losing Romania to the results of Romanian democracy. And so you get the Anthony Blinkens of the world who, as far as I know, all of them had their tentacles back in Ukraine in the Maidan Revolution, which was an American-funded, an American-instigated overthrow of a Democrat election.
Yeah.
So they could keep control of the region while accusing Russia of doing the exact same thing. And so basically that was the rabbit hole I went down when the Tenant media, you go to Russia Insanity in Canada, where they allege Russia is trying to interfere in Canadian politics, where Romania overturns an election because they say Russia's interfering. And in reality, in Canada, you got Chinese Indian influence. In Romania, you've got American influence. And it seems that the only one not doing very much influencing is Russia itself.
Yeah, no, I saw the Matrix on this too a few weeks ago, and it's like we have no idea what the people in Eastern Europe actually think and what they want for their leadership, because we've been heavily involved in every election they've had over the last probably few decades since the Soviet Union collapsed.
Banning whatever they have to say.
Yeah, so I mean, we've funded the shit out of every revolution, every presidential election. We've taken presidents out of office, so they could be under the control of us against their will for all we know. For all we know, all the former Soviet states that went independent after the Cold War could very much want to be part of Russia, and we have no idea about that because NATO has such a thumb on the scale.
They have a thumb on the scale and a finger on the button, but that's the reality. And then as I'm listening to this, because, we have no meaningful, at least I have no meaningful knowledge of the intricacies of the politics, but you're dealing with former USSR countries. They will be split. They will be divided. And democracy might actually be leaning away from NATO. Maybe they don't necessarily want to be dragged into a war over Ukraine because it's not with Romanian interest. They don't want to be dragged into a World War III with Russia because what the heck do they have to do with Ukraine? And so they vote accordingly. And you see how they go after the populace. They call him a far-right guy. Apparently he praised Hitler as if that's Russia's going to finance or fund the campaign to the guy who praises Hitler when they're fighting Nazification in Ukraine, where Ukraine has more ties to. None of the rationale makes any sense, but the precedent that they're setting right now is that if it's a populist outsider candidate, start small, go to Romania. Let it happen in the dead of night where people don't even hear about it, and then normalize it in Canada, normalize it in the States, and say, oh, look at this. It's an anomaly. How could a Trump-like figure have won? Must be Russia. Annul the election.
Yeah. I think they just want a total pushover in Russia because they were, our government was thrilled when the Soviet Union collapsed. They had Boris Yeltsin in there. We had the oligarchs running things, and we had a lot of control over them because we were letting them get rich. But then I think Putin came in and kind of corrected that and regulated that because they were taking advantage of people. And our government didn't anticipate somebody like Putin getting into power, and they'd never tolerate him for a second. The second Putin got in, they cut off communication. They wouldn't let Putin in NATO. He asked him multiple times. So I think they never gave him a fair shot. Even Blinken was involved in it way back then. He was part of Clinton's administration. So I think this has been a goal on their agenda for 20 years now.
Well, no, there's no question. And when you operate on the basis of the iron law of woke projection, and everybody says the war in Ukraine is about Russian imperialism, the reality is, and it's playing out over and over again, and it's going to play out in what we're seeing Maidan 2.0 out of Romania. It's NATO, deep state military industrial complex imperialism, and all of Europe and Eastern Europe are tools in that war, and that's why they're waging it. In fact, not because Russia wants to take over the world, but because NATO seemingly wants to take over Europe.
Yeah, and because the military-industrial complex would shrivel up and die if it wasn't for NATO expansion. Like the head of the NATO expansion movement was the head of the president from Lockheed Martin.
It's a deep incestuous pool of corruption. That is it, and I'm going to be following what's happening in Canada because the hearing itself was suspended because someone pulled a fire alarm and everyone was looking for Jamal Bowman. Bada bing, bada boom. So when it takes back up, I'll continue coverage on that.
So if you like this clip, click right here, and if you want to see more like it, click right here. Stay angry, Patriots.